Welcome back everyone to this mini-series about agentic engineering, specifically with Svelte. Now in the last episode we just talked about what we will build, how we will build it, and we started setting up our application with DSV CLI. In this episode we are actually going to start setting up our AI environment. We're going to choose an agent, we're going to talk about multiple agents, we're going to set up the Svelte MCP, and we're going to talk about what even the MCP does. Now, before we begin, a small presentation is due. Who am I? I am Paolo Ricciuti, and I lead the Svelte team at Mainmatter, which is an engineering consultancy that specializes in Svelte, Ember, Rust, and we help our clients through their toughest challenges in Svelte, Ember, or Rust. We help them adopt the new technology if they want. Most importantly, we helped a lot of clients to set up all sorts of system around their code base so that they can ship faster without compromising on quality. And this is basically what we're gonna do with our agent using the Agentic engineering framework. Exactly like we did before AI was even a thing with our clients, we're gonna set up everything so that our agent can ship fast without breaking our code. So let's jump right into this episode. Please sit down and enjoy the view. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, if you are using Svelte, you may have seen that recently Svelte 5 was released. It's been more than a year at this point. The problem is that Svelte 5 introduced a big syntax change, and who doesn't like big syntax changes? AI models. So basically at the same time that Svelte 5 was released, ChatGPT and Claude started to become popular and agentic coding started to become popular, which means that if we open, actually let me open a chat editor. Let me switch back to a very old model, GPT 4.1. This is really not good. It's not a good model, but what I found is that it's very agentic in the sense that it loves to listen to tools and stuff like that. So I just want to demonstrate one of the problems with AI coding and Svelte. Specifically, let's say, can you create a Svelte counter component, right? So let me check that MCP list. Okay, I don't have anything. So like this is pure GPT 4.1. Let's start with this session, and we can see that the agent is creating a file, and let's take a look at the file that the agent generated. And as you can see, if you have been involved with Svelte in various level of like since a long time, you might recognize this, and this also gives us a hint. This is a legacy component. There is nothing new about this component. You can use this component in Svelte 5 because we support both legacy mode and runes mode, but if you are using Svelte 5, you most likely don't want this component. Now, we could migrate this component to Svelte 5 syntax, and ta-da, this is now Svelte 5. But we don't want to do this manually. Like, we don't want to change every on-call on-click to on-click. We don't want to change every let count is equal to 0 to $state 0 and stuff like that. We want to be able to empower our agent to actually build by itself. So let me remove this counter component, and let's see what we can do to help our fellow agent. So we kind of explored this already last time, but SV, the SV CLI, also has a command to add something, which is the same command that gets executed after you create a project. So I can do pnpm dlx sv add. This will ask me what I want to add. Now, Prettier is already there, ESLint is already there, Vita's Playwright. What we want to add is the MCP. Now, what is the Svelte MCP? MCP stands for Model Context Protocol, which is basically a way for whoever developed a specific MCP server, in this case, the Svelte team, to package a series of instructions and tools for the agent to be better at Svelte in this case. So we want to add the MCP. And as you can see, you don't have to choose it at the beginning of the project. You can just add it whenever you need. So I can do this. And this is asking me, which client would you like to use? This is one of the big problems, in my opinion, nowadays with AI, because each client has its own configuration, each client has its own way of adding an MCP server or an agent or whatever. And this is a bit annoying because we basically have to keep track of everything inside SV. But luckily, Jean is doing this work for us. And so we can choose which client we want to use. So a client, an MCP client, is basically the things that will run your agent. So VS Code, for example, is one of the clients that you can use. And whenever you run this chat with agent mode, that's an MCP client, basically. Each client has its own configuration file, and each client is basically where your agent will run and will modify the code. Another very popular one is Claude Code, and with Claude Code, you basically have to use your Anthropic subscription. So it's very tied to Anthropic. You buy your Anthropic subscription, and you also get access to Claude Code. There are ways around, you can use some proxy that will allow you to use Claude Code with something else. I am pretty sure that is again the terms of service or Anthropic. And another very popular one, and also one of my favorite, and that's why I'm gonna select it, is OpenCode. So we're gonna add those three. If you are using Cursor or Gemini or something else, you can also select other. The point is that the same configuration that we're gonna add, you will need to add it to your MCP client. I'm pretty sure that if you're using Codex, for example, there is a guide for you. Your MCP client will tell you how to add an MCP server. This will ask us another question, which is local or remote. So basically an MCP server can communicate with the MCP client in two ways. Either the MCP client will spawn a new process. So this is basically the Svelte MCP server in this case is packaged as an npm package, and the client will literally execute that npm package and communicate with standard in and standard out. The remote one instead is a remote connection, so it's using HTTP. So it's an HTTP server that is listening for requests, and the MCP client will do a bunch of requests to your MCP server, and the MCP server will respond back. Now, which one to use? It's kind of up to you. Technically, the local one, you could use it without internet connection. Obviously, that only really works if you have a very good remote, local model too. If you are on a plane, for example, yes, you could maybe have a very good computer with a very good model that runs on it. It's a stretch. You will likely need an internet connection if you want to build with AI. And this brings me to the second point, which is the local one is an npm package, and we generally publish the npm package if there is some important feature, while the remote one is just an HTTP server that is hosted, and this will basically be deployed as soon as we make some change. So generally, the remote one will be more up to date. So personally, I always prefer to use the remote one, and it's also much easier to do it because it's just a URL string that will be set up. So we can do this, we can execute PMPM, even if in this case we don't really need to install anything. If we switch back to the news aggregator and we open the file, we can see what has been added. So we have two new files here. We have the Claude.md and the agent.md. The reason why we need bot is because Claude code doesn't read agents.md. So like Claude code is probably the last one that actually doesn't use agents.md and only specifically read Claude.md. One suggestion that I will give you is that if you want to use multiple clients, because maybe you are working on a big project and each one of your developers wants to use its own client, to keep them in sync, what you can do is that inside your Claude.md, instead of having the same content, you can just do @agents.md, and this will basically tell Claude, please go read this file to get the information. And we will get to what this actually means, like what is an agents.md and why it's important. And then we have this .mcp.json configuration object. This is the one for Claude. And as you can see, like all the configuration objects are pretty close with one another. So like this is the one for Claude. There is opencode.json, which is similar but not really the same. This is using, like, it's adding the Svelte opencode.vscode MCP one, which is, as you can see, very close to Claude one, but not really the same. Like they are all similar but not the same, which is why I kind of hate the current state of the tools. So we basically now this repo can technically work and it will have the MCP server, but in OpenCode, in Claude Code, and in VS Code. Before we move into like looking at what the MCP server can do and stuff like that, let's take a look at very quickly at the agents.md. So the agents.md is basically an instruction file that will be loaded every time you create a new session. So like the moment I do a new session here, now inside this chat, the very first message will have this agents.md appended to it. So this is basically you giving instructions to your agent about stuff that you want him to do in a certain way. The reason why we create one when you add the MCP is because we are explaining to the agent that it has an MCP server and which tools have available and when to use those tools. And we found that like it's much more reliable. Like if you use this agents.md, basically the agent will invoke the MCP server in a much more reliable way. Let's actually take a look very quickly. Like you are able to use the Svelte MCP server where we have access to a comprehensive Svelte 5 and Svelte kit documentation. Here's how to use the available tools effectively. So those are the tools that the Svelte MCP server make available to the agent, which is list section. So this is basically to get all the documentation page that are available. It's a list of all the documentation page that are available. This is basically just to search a documentation page. Get documentation is actually to get one or more of the sections that are listed inside this thing. So like these two tools by themselves already do a lot, because basically one of the problem with LLMs is that when you finish the training of an LLM, that LLM is basically finished. That's it. You cannot add more information, if not by prompting and by changing the system prompt and by the agents.md. And so the main problem is that basically, for example, we recently changed how data loading works in SvelteKit. It's an experimental flag, but it's using like before it was using load function. Now if you're using an experimental an experimental flag, you can use remote functions. And no agent has seen any code for any remote functions. And so it doesn't even know how they look. And so with this get documentation, what the agent can do is get up-to-date documentation on the remote function, and so learn how to use them. The Svelte autofixer is kind of the star of the MCP server, because this is basically using static analysis to analyze the code that the LLM generates. And once you have the code generated, it will do static analysis to basically spot common mistakes that the LLMs does. We're gonna look at this in a second in more details. And then there is playground link. We are probably not gonna use this. And in fact, we are actually gonna remove this from our agents.md in a second, because the reason why this is here is that you can technically add the MCP server even to a chat app like Claude.ai. And if you do stuff like that, this will allow Claude.ai to actually give you a link to a Svelte playground with the code that it generated, and you can just click and play around with the code. So we don't need this here, because in this project, we actually just want the agent to write to a file most of the time. But it is a nice tool to have when you're using it in a different way. So let's switch to the agent, and let's see, now that we have our Svelte MCP server up and running, let's see what do we get at our disposal. So we've seen that we will get our tools that the LLM will be able to call, but we can also get something which also, in my opinion, is a bit underrated in the world of MCP, which is resources and prompt. So resources are kind of like files. So in VS Code, it's actually pretty clear. Like you can see that there is this add context button here. And if I click, I can add a file, for example. So I can say, hey, please, look into this folder and, I don't know, find me all these Svelte files. And this is like a prompt that I might write. But if you take a look at the what other context you can add, you also see these MCP resources. And MCP resources are basically a file that the MCP server is exposing. So if I click on MCP resources, you can see that I have a bunch of resources that this Svelte MCP server is serving from the server. And these are basically all the pages of the documentation, which means that if I know, for example, that I want to work with transitions, for example, I can include the transition documentation. And you can see that this is literally just a file, like it literally got back the content of a file. And I can add more. For example, I can add animate, and this is also the documentation for the animations. So all of this is basically a way for you to introduce context into your agent so that it doesn't need to fetch the transition documentation. It's already there. So the resources are for something that you, the user, want to add into the context. And another way to add information into the context is with a prompt. So if I do slash, you can see that I have all these commands here, but the very first one is mcp.svelte.svelte task. Now this prompt is slightly different from resource. This is asking me for some information. In this case, is the task to be performed. So I can say, can you write a Svelte counter component? And I can insert this text, and you can see that basically in the prompt, this is the prompt that is being served by the MCP server, which is, you are a Svelte expert, task to build a component, blah, 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 blah. This is the list of available docs. And then at the end of the list, there is the task, which is what you basically wrote in. So like this is basically just copy and pasted into your input. And this is basically a way to instruct once again the agent about which documentation are available without having to make a call to the tools, and also to give a bit of guidance about how to use the MCP server. Now you might ask, like, what's the difference with agents.md? This is just an instruction that gets injected, and this is your actual prompt. So like it's just another little nudge of using the MCP server. So let's actually see with the same pretty old model that produced very bad Svelte 5 code before. Let's see what happens now that we have our agents.md, our resources, and our prompt used, and most importantly, now that we have our MCP server for which the agent can call tools. So if I send this, and you can see that it ran the Svelte autofixer. This time it actually was pretty good. So since like when using the resource and the prompt, the GPT 4.1 actually got a counter component first try, and I wanted to show you the autofixer worked. Let's build a component that is a bit more complex, which is a temperature converter component using Svelte 5. So you can see that the GPT created this temperature converter component, and as usual, it's basically a Svelte 4 component, right? It ran the Svelte autofixer and used static analysis to like nudge the agent into writing proper Svelte 5. So let's see how it looks like. It seems like this is actually proper Svelte 5 code. There's no on colon click. There's no like variable lingering around. So like it seems to have done it. And let's actually take a look at like what it generated. So it created this file and then it ran the Svelte autofixer with the code in the file. And as you can see, like from the output, you can see that the label statement is not allowed in runes mode. Use derived or effect instead. It's basically talking to the agent to suggest how it should fix the issue. And you can see that it also has this require another tool call after fixing is equal to true, which basically means like, please fix the component and then rerun this tool. And so like it fixed the component and then it used $derived passing a function in, which is another error that the LLMs usually do. And Celsius is updated but is not declared with $state. Changing its value will not correctly trigger an update. But also, you are passing a function to derived when declaring Fahrenheit, but derived expects an expression. You can use derived.by instead. So this kind of suggestions is a suggestions that we will never give to a human, but we know that the LLMs always get this wrong, and so we give the LLM the right suggestion. And so it fixed it, and then it rerun the Svelte autofixer, and let's see what the autofixer had to say this time. Cannot bind to constant, so it was probably, const Celsius is equal to $state 0, and then trying to bind to it. And then finally, it ran the last time with the right code, the one that we actually have inside the converter. And it has no issue, no suggestions. And so now, again, this very old and dumb model, because nowadays models are very, very smart, so like they will have no problem whatsoever to do this. But even this very old model was able to produce good Svelte 5 code just by following the instruction of the MCP server. The nice thing is also that this is an evolving static analysis, in the sense that the more we see common errors that the LLM does, the more we can add that check to the MCP server so that the LLM will not do the same thing in the future. So we've seen VS Code and how VS Code works, like how to add a resource to VS Code, how to add a prompt. But if you remember at the beginning of the video, we actually set up the MCP for 3 available clients: OpenCode, Claude Code, and VS Code. Before we close this episode, I want to show you how it looks like to do the same thing in Claude Code, in OpenCode. I want to do a very small change. Instead of using the plugin, I want to use the MCP. I need to do Svelte, and I will do URL https://mcp.svelte.dev/mcp, and type is remote. So the reason why I made this change is because we're going to talk about the plugin in a future episode, and I want you to see OpenCode like naked. So let's switch to the terminal. Let's clear everything, and now let's see how Claude Code fares. So the difference with VS Code is that Claude is an app that basically works in the terminal. Use this and all the future. So this is Claude Code. You have a terminal UI, and you can prompt here, and this is working with my Anthropic subscription. And inside Claude Code, you can basically do the same thing. So like you can tag files. So I can say, please check svelte config and blah, 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 blah. And you can do the same thing with the MCP. So if we take a look at the MCP, we see that we have the Svelte MCP connected. And so since I have the Svelte MCP connected, I can tag a resource. So I can do svelte : I don't know, it's not auto-completing, but generally you could do something like that in Claude Code. The same thing is true for prompts. So if I do this, you can see that the very first is svelte task MCP. So I can do this, and then I can pass as the first argument my task. So I can say, can you create a svelte counter component? Now this is using Opus, which is like state-of-the-art model. If I send this, you will see that even Opus, that knows Svelte 5 very well, is gonna ask me to run the Svelte autofixer. And you will see that like this will ask me to run the Svelte autofixer. VS Code will also ask you to run the Svelte autofixer. The reason why I didn't before is because I already approved it. But that's also something very important. Like, so MCP servers, be it local or remote, you need to pay attention when you add an MCP server. Because the moment you add an MCP server, you are technically exposing your agent to a prompt injection, for example. If you are running the process locally, you are literally running a process on your machine. So you are literally downloading an NPM package and executing it on your machine. But even then, like a tool response could be malicious. Like, so don't just add an MCP server at random in your project. Like, vet the MCP server, verify that it is trusted, and then only after allow an MCP server to run. In this case, it's the official Svelte MCP, so you can trust it if you trust me. And so I will say yes, and don't ask again for Svelte autofixer. So as you can see, Opus created a much simpler counter component, but also that worked flawlessly. It is also asking us to generate a playground link because it did not write to a file. And now let's talk about my favorite, which is OpenCode. So, and this is what we're gonna use for the duration of this mini-series. So if you don't like it, like, feel free to leave a comment and tell me to use something different. I'm gonna use OpenCode anyway. So I can do OpenCode, and the reason why I like OpenCode more is that OpenCode is much more customizable. The plugins, I can build around OpenCode, like I can access a lot more of OpenCode. It's fully open source, so if you want to add something to it, you can add it. For example, OpenCode did not have prompts and resources for MCP. And I said, what? I'm going to add them. And so now you can actually use them. So if we take a look at the MCP, you can see that I do have some other MCP connected because like I have other MCP, like again, this is my daily driver. Something that I do generally is I keep them disabled and I only enable them when I am actually working on something. So like the Svelte MCP is generally disconnected for me. And when I'm working on a project that has Svelte, either I use a local configuration file like this one, so it's automatically connected, or I simply connect, like I enable the Svelte MCP server when I need it. This is also to help with context. So context is one of the most precious resources when working with agents, and you should pay attention to not consuming too much context, because the more context you consume, the dumber the model becomes. So that's something that we will need to pay close attention to. So in this case, for example, I don't need the context 7, I don't need dot prompts, I don't need squiggles. So like I will just use the Svelte MCP. And I can, as I've said, use resources. So I can do at, and then I can do svelte : and these are all the resources that Svelte has available. So in this case, if I want to add a transition one, I think I can just search for transition, Svelte transition, and now I've included the transition just like in VS Code. And once again, like I can also include a file, so I can do plus page.svelte, and this is referencing a file. I can also use a prompt, so I can do MCP svelte task MCP. When I do this, I'm including now the svelte task prompt, and I can pass the arguments as the second argument. So I can say, can you build a svelte 5 counter component? Now, I can send it, and as you can see, OpenCode is also showing me that like my prompt has been completely replaced with the actual content of the prompt. And you can see that it's invoking the Svelte autofixer here. And yeah, it generated the counter component. Obviously, this is Opus, so it's a big model. The reason why I like OpenCode more, first thing first, I like how it looks. But it also has a bunch of very nice utilities. Like you can share this chart with someone. You have a quick glance of like the amount of context that you have. So in this case, as you can see, like with this very simple prompt, we already reached like 20% of our context, which is it's not enough, like it's not a lot, because this includes the system prompt, includes all our prompt, it includes like the function call and stuff like that. But it is 20%. So like we need to pay attention to this, and this is exactly what we're gonna talk about in the next episodes, like context management, how to work around context. A lot of people say that MCP bloat the context. I don't agree fully. Like I think a bad MCP will bloat your context, just like a bad skill will bloat your context. But we are going to talk about this more in the next episode. We will actually finally start to build something into this project. So like the first couple of episodes were about introduction, because we needed to set up everything so that now we have our environment set up and we can actually start working with our agents. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If you need help with your project, feel free to check out mainmatter.com. If you need help with Svelte, with Ember, with Rust, feel free to reach out, and we're gonna help you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode.